This edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by ProXPN, the virtual private network service. Protect your internet by securing your connection and get up to 50% off by visiting proxpn.com and using the offer code VOICES. And by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like MacVoices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. Hi, I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Mac community. Folks, we're going to take another deep dive into accessibility with the newest version of the book iOS Access for All and its author, Ms. Shelly Brisbin. Shelly, it's great to have you back.
Hello, Chuck. It's great to be here.
It's always fun to talk to you about accessibility because you are a bit of an expert on it. You seem to be getting more of an expert with each version of this book. And as I understand it, the book has grown a bit.
Oh, my goodness. Every time I do one, it gets a little bit bigger. And some of that is natural because iOS keeps adding accessibility features. But I also feel like every time I do it, I learn more things, and I want to include them in the book. So we've got about 65 pages of new content in this book, even though the update to iOS 9 for accessibility was relatively minor. So I'm not even sure how I did it myself, but I'm pleased that I did.
Now, let's be clear here, too, that this is updated for iOS 9. So that's really
Yes.
the primary reason for the revision. But I also want to touch on one other thing. I seem to be noticing more and more tips for productivity for those folks who probably don't think of themselves as being accessibility eligible. If I'm creating a new term here. Turn up the screen brightness, turn down the screen brightness, turn up the font size, change the volume, do kind of things that for whatever reason you are always digging into the accessibility panels to do these things.
Well, I think part of that is, and in the accessibility community, we kind of laugh about that because the mainstream tends to discover features that we use every day, and they call them secret hidden tricks. And that amuses those of us who live in the accessibility world. Because, see, I think what it is that when you are not normally an accessibility user, and you scroll through settings and you see that accessibility area, you think, I don't need to go there. That's not something that's part of what I need. I use my iPhone in a way that Apple designed it, and so they move on. And then so what happens is people who are looking for things to write, or by some other happenstance, end up in the accessibility pane. They go, oh, wow, here's something I didn't even know I could do. And they get to write a story that says 10 secret iOS features. And so that's it's entertaining for us, but it does mean that some people end up poking around in the accessibility pane and finding really interesting stuff that they didn't know that's there, that is useful both to folks in the mainstream community as well as those who use accessibility all the time.
Yeah, I appreciate that observation because that is kind of where it usually comes from me is, here's a secret trick. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, accessibility. Okay. And I sort of passed right through the signpost that says accessibility on my way to whatever it is that it promises to do. But it's a great place to dig around and find some of those tips and tricks that even though they might not apply to you or you might not think they apply to you, can be very, very useful.
Can I tell you another reason it happens is that back in the day, accessibility was at the very bottom of settings, general settings in iOS, and Apple moved it way up, so it's now something like the fourth item when you open general, and so a lot of people probably see that item that did not otherwise, and so for us that's great. Now we have the ability to search settings, which you didn't used to have, but also if you're an accessibility user, scrolling to the end kind of gets to be a chore, so it's kind of nice to have it near the top as well.
I bring this up right at the beginning of the interview because I don't want folks to listen to us and say, "Oh, accessibility, that doesn't apply to me," and move on. I think it's important to understand that whether you consider yourself as needing accessibility options, they can be very useful regardless. So it's just a label, and it's a label that has unfortunate connotations simply because it's come to have connotations. I wish it could be just Fred, and that would be it.
Well, I don't know that it's unfortunate. I think folks who use accessibility features appreciate that they're there, and it's just a different way of using the tool. I also will say that a lot of people, and I get communications from people that this is the case, and it's the same. It's true in my life as well. A lot of people have someone in their life who could use accessibility features. My mother has age-related macular degeneration. Her only computing device is an iPad. And so I got in there and showed her. I said, she doesn't understand what I write a lot of the times. And so I had a lot of fun showing her not only how to use her iPad by turning up the brightness and increasing the text size, but also saying, Mom, this is actually the book I wrote. So you can look at it if you want to. But the point is, there probably is. And I hear from people who have kids in their lives who have iPads and take them to school, but maybe they're on the autism spectrum or they're hearing impaired, and they're not sure whether those iPads are going to be accessible to them. And if they're not in a program where accessibility is pointed out, they may not know that. So I have parents buying the book and folks who want to help their older relatives. And just quickly, one more thing on my mom. So because she has macular degeneration, what she needs is a very bright screen. And my particular visual impairment means that I want a very dark screen. So when I go to her house, I invert the colors and I make it dark, but I have to turn it bright when I leave. But it's all the same thing. It's the idea is accessibility is a spectrum. It's not just on or off. And so I think a lot of people are probably in that situation where you might turn the screen up very bright because that's what your eyes need, or you might turn the volume up really loud because that's what your hearing impairment requires, or something like that. And just knowing that those tools are out there and figuring out that you have options to use them, whether you're a full-time accessibility user, maybe that's the way we should say, you're a full-time accessibility user or you're a part-time accessibility feature user.
I like that. And when I said unfortunate, let me be real clear so I don't get emails. I meant unfortunate because of the idea that it's a label that some people don't think applies to them. And so I love what you just said, full-time and part-time accessibility. That means we can all use it at some point just because it benefits us. Mm-hmm. Because it's secret features, right?
It's secret.
Yeah. So tell us about some of the things that you've added to the book since there's all this new content, even though that iOS 9 didn't change that many things.
Yeah, I'll say that for folks who aren't familiar with how accessibility changed in iOS 9, it very much mirrors the experience that most iOS users had when they moved from iOS 8 to iOS 9, where there were a lot of things that were fixed or tweaked or made to work a little better or a little differently. And accessibility was kind of the same way. There are a few great improvements, but there are a lot of little ones, a lot of bug fixes. We experience quite a number of bugs that get squashed and reappear and all that sort of thing. And so iOS 9 both caused and killed some. As far as the book, I left the structure of the book the same from the iOS 8 edition to the iOS 9 edition. So what I do is I cover accessibility in terms of groups of features. There's a chapter for blind folks, for low vision users, for hearing impaired, for motor disabilities. And I kept that structure the same, but I wanted to improve the way the book worked for people. So I did a lot. I mean, some of it really sounds very straightforward and basic, but I made a lot of internal chapter links so that if I refer you to something in another chapter, there's a live link that takes you straight there. I organized certain sections in different ways so that they would address some of the feedback I got in terms of features like Braille screen input, where people didn't have enough step-by-step instructions as to how to use that feature. And then in the low vision section, which I'm particularly proud of, probably because that's kind of where I spend my time in iOS, I did a lot of visuals to give people a sense of how they could use the increased contrast settings and bold text settings to change the look of the light and dark keyboards. And so that's done visually, and I took more room for screenshots in that chapter because I think it's easier for people to understand how a change they make in a setting is going to affect them when they see side by side. Here's what it's like with the setting off. Here's what it's like with the setting on. So a lot of that sort of what you might call cosmetic stuff I changed in the book is actually intended to make it a more productive resource for people.
Shelly, one thing I remember about iOS 9 when it came out, there was so much controversy over the thin fonts. We may have covered this before, but has Apple done anything from an accessibility standpoint to mitigate some of those issues?
Well, it's funny because when iOS 7 came out, everybody went nuts, including myself, about the fonts, and it was just crazy. And I had a section in the iOS 7 and iOS 8 versions of this book called The Woes of iOS 7 or 8 because and it was in the low vision chapter, and it was basically like, I can't make it better. Apple has not helped us in terms of these thin fonts. Here are a few things you can do, but I recognize that it is not an ideal environment, and I feel the same way. iOS 9, with the introduction of the San Francisco font throughout iOS, in my opinion, has made it better. Are there situations where the fonts could be better? Yes, and I'll talk about one of those in a second. But I think overall, the challenges with the thin fonts, especially in combination with some of the highly transparent backgrounds, is less in iOS 9 than it was in iOS 8 and certainly in iOS 7. Now, one thing I want to talk about, and this is less Apple than it is third-party developers, and I'm sure they're going with user interface guidelines that Apple has provided, but it's an issue for those of us who are low vision. There are a lot of settings and menu items in third-party apps that are just using smaller fonts. So whatever Apple, and they're not necessarily supporting dynamic type to allow you to make the fonts bigger by default. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think some of us in the accessibility community probably need to take some time to educate developers about that. And I wish that I haven't really dug into the iOS 9 usability graphic user interface guidelines, pardon me. But I feel like there's a trend because developers want to get more stuff on those screens to use smaller fonts in some cases. And so I spent a lot more time in Zoom and figuring out whether an app supports dynamic type than it used to. So I guess the short answer is it's gotten better, but new challenges appear all the time. And some of those are of developers making rather than Apple's making.
Yeah, I know we've talked about the third-party developer aspect of things before, and my perception is that it continues to get better, that more and more developers are aware of accessibility issues and building in at least some options. I mean, I'm sure there's some apps out there that it's just not possible, but I think they're trying.
I do too, and I think a lot of most people who use accessibility features, and let's just talk about something like VoiceOver, where supporting accessibility is something that has to affirmatively be done, where you label things properly and you make them accessible to VoiceOver. I think most developers get that, and I think most people who use accessibility features are realistic about situations in which there's some games, for example, where it's just not practical or logical, and even if you labeled the button, somebody couldn't necessarily use those apps, but that's the vast minority. And I think most apps that you come across, especially ones that are in ongoing development, tend to support accessibility to a greater level than they once did. And I think it's easier to talk to developers about getting them to support accessibility. There are definitely heroes in the mainstream developing community. And then there are also, unfortunately, developers that are sort of recalcitrant. And sometimes it's a developer that is very important in iOS and doesn't really understand that folks who use VoiceOver are just as interested in using their tool as folks out in the rest of the iOS using community. And so you have some challenges like that. It's gotten better. I'm gonna use this company as an example because it's gotten better, although they still have a long way to go. Slack is an example. A lot of people use Slack for inter-office communication or to communicate with friends and with communities that they're a part of. And for a long time, Slack worked with VoiceOver, but there were challenges that made it extremely frustrating for people to use. And they kind of got religion because Twitter beat them up. And they're looking to hire an accessibility person. Of course, they put a CAPTCHA in their ad for an accessibility person, which was unfortunate. So they have a little ways to go. It's gotten better, and I think, and I'm not sure whether it got better because people in the accessibility community were able to convince them, or because in the course of developing their app, they added something they already intended to do. But, then there's the contrast with there are other developers out there who have just been amazing in terms of either baking VoiceOver support in immediately right away, or when somebody said, we really love your app and we'd like to use it, going, oh, awesome. All right, I'll put VoiceOver support in. And so it's kind of all over the map. And advocates for accessibility tend to have to be good at speaking to developers and talking to them in language that they will understand and saying, look, I realize you've got a lot of things on your plate. You got some bugs to squash, but accessibility is important because people who are blind and visually impaired and hearing impaired and motor impaired love their iPhones, and they would like to use your app to the same degree that anybody else can.
I really am glad to hear that Slack is, and of course, I don't keep track of all the accessibility issues for all the apps, and certainly not the major ones.
Oh, come on, Chuck.
Well, you sometimes you become very aware of certain things, especially if you've decided to become semi-dependent on a particular accessibility. And the quickest example, I think, for a lot of folks is just larger fonts. or a brighter screen. That just, whether you have a vision impairment or not, it's just nice sometimes to have a really bright screen or a really dark screen. And
Right.
when something doesn't support that, or the larger fonts or whatever, then we get a little taste of what it's like for the accessibility community and why they feel left out or why they feel left out.
Sure. Well, here's the challenge, though. So fonts are a good example because Twitter, there are a lot of Twitter clients out there. If I don't like, and this is not an actual example, the default Twitter client for iOS is accessible. I'm not slagging them at all. If I don't like that client for accessibility reasons, I can go to Twitterific, I can go to Tweetings, I can go to any number of clients, and it's well known in the community which of those tools will give me the kind of access to Twitter I need. Twitterific is my favorite personally because it has the large fonts and it has the ability to change the screen theme. Now, something like Slack, there's not really an alternative. That's a one-size-fit-all app. And so it's more urgent that I convince the folks at Slack, not me personally, because that's not what I'm doing, but whoever the folks that are working with that. It's more urgent that somebody who's producing an application that does one thing, and that's the only game in town as far as accessing it, get with the program as far as accessibility. If a particular Twitter client isn't accessible, I just won't use that one, and I'll use Twitterific. And when I upgrade my Twitterific, I'll probably get on Twitter and I'll say, it's awesome because Twitterific has made, and I've used that example throughout the book of Twitterific and Instapaper and apps like that, where people have choices. And in the accessibility community, just like anywhere else, you gravitate toward the things that work well for you and where the developers listen to the things that you need.
I don't think that's just the accessibility community, Shelly.
Sure, that's the point.
I think we all do it.
Point, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases you don't have those choices, and in many cases you do. So it's a different dynamic when you're trying to communicate with a developer, because if I'm gravitating away from a particular Twitter client for accessibility reasons, then I can still use it, but I may, by doing that, pressure those who are not accessible, if they want my business, to changing what they do. But in the case of an app that is the only game in town, it's a different challenge.
Let's finish off this section with celebrating some heroes. Who are some of the best apps out there? What are some of the best apps out there from an accessibility standpoint? Who's doing it right?
All right. Well, Overcast for podcast listeners is a great app. And again, these are apps, and there's a chapter in the back of the book which includes about 110 accessible apps, and then they're chosen because they're great apps that also happen to be accessible. And so any heroes I mention aren't just randomly accessible, they're also great apps. More importantly, they're great apps that happen to be accessible. So Overcast is great. Instapaper is terrific. There's an app called Voice Dream Reader. Do you know Voice Dream Reader?
No, not at all.
VoiceStream it's a reading app, and what it allows you to do is grab material from other apps or other formats, say EPUB or articles from the web via links like via Instapaper. You sync to VoiceStream Reader, and then VoiceStream will allow you to read them out loud with text to speech using a voice of your choice. And so my workflow is that I see an article that I want to read on Twitter that I don't have time right now to read. I send it to Instapaper. I sync my Instapaper queue to VoiceStream Reader. The articles come into VoiceStream Reader, and I can use text-to-speech to listen to them in a voice at a speed that I wish. I also have the ability to change the font size and the theme. Anyway, so the guy and there's one guy who has he's got several apps, but VoiceStream Reader is the most well-known. And I think he did intend the app for the accessibility community, but a lot of people use it. It's a great app, and it's just an example of where one guy listened to a lot of people's needs and desires and has made a terrific, highly, highly awesome app. Twitterific, I mentioned, is a great Twitter client. A lot of people like Tweetings. Let's see. There's just so many on a daily mainstream, productivity apps like Byword and golly, now I'm blanking because they're just a ton of them. I mean, like I say, I have 110 of them in the back of the book. So.
Good. Okay, so go get the book. There we go. Yeah. Well, listen, I think it's great that there are, first of all, that you've included that list, but second, that there are 110 apps that you can point out and say, great apps or not, they are great for accessibility. That's outstanding.
Right, and I'll point out another resource that I have nothing to do with it. There's a great site called applevis.com, And that provides a forum and a community for folks to talk about accessibility to iOS and macOS in terms of blindness and low vision. But they also have app recommendations and a hall of fame of really great apps. There are a lot of terrific audio games that there's a company that does. See, now I'm thinking of them. There's a company that does a series of games called Blindfold Games, which are audio only games that are just great. And there's I don't know how many of these got, 20 of them by now. Anyway, AppleVis is a great resource if you're just looking to find out about apps and what their level of accessibility is and kind of what the current state of accessibility on any given app is.
This edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by ProXPN, the virtual private network service. Protect your internet by securing your connection and get up to 50% off by visiting proxpn.com and using the offer code VOICES. It seems we talk a lot about security these days. You can barely open a news website or scroll your Twitter feed without seeing something about hacking, identity theft, surveillance of one kind or another, and a dozen other security-related topics. There are a few ways you can handle this. You can stick your head in the sand and pretend it isn't happening. You can adopt the "it can't happen to me" attitude. Or you can take a few simple steps to reduce your exposure. One of those steps is to sign up with ProXPN, the virtual private network service, so the guy sitting in the corner of the coffee shop isn't tapping into your web surfing habits, or the girl in the next row at the airport isn't recording your passwords as you log into your email, do your online banking, or even shop at Amazon. The team at ProXPN don't log anything, so there are no records for anyone to try to acquire. They don't watch what you do either. In fact, they couldn't if they wanted to, since you're using their 2048-bit encryption key and a 512-bit encryption tunnel. Don't know what that means? No problem. You don't have to. Just know that you're safe and secure and no one is watching what you do or where you do it. I hear from way too many people who say, "But I have nothing to hide." Of course you do. Credit card numbers, logins to company websites and email accounts, your brokerage account, your bank account. Even online shopping accounts can be problematic if you've saved credit card numbers there. You could find yourself paying for an 80-inch TV that you never ordered, or even worse, a PC that you never would have ordered. All that and more can be avoided if you just go to proxpn.com right now and sign up for a free account. No credit card necessary. Try ProXPN and find out how easy it is to use on your Mac. Find out how good it feels to know you're safe and secure when you tap into any public Wi-Fi hotspot. Discover how much you like knowing that no one is tracking you, that no one can track you. Then, take it up a notch and sign up using the code VOICES to get up to 50% off a premium account to get unlimited VPN speed. Get all the ports open so you can do whatever you want with no restrictions, support for your mobile devices, and a host of other features. That's ProXPN and the code VOICES for up to 50% off their premium level service. Give it a try and let me know how much you like being secure. I'm Chuck at MacVoices.com. Thanks to ProXPN for their support of Mac Voices. So you took me or headed me in a direction I wanted to go. I've been kind of curious to see what your thoughts are on the way that how things are developing in the voice control. Of course, we have Siri. You can talk to the Google app and get pretty good results.
Yeah.
Now we have something called Hound from SoundHound. I don't know if you've played with that or not.
Haven't, no.
Yeah, that's the newest and allegedly the hottest because you can do
Right.
follow-up queries to Hound. How is this affecting the accessibility community, and is it as much progress as I think is being made, or is it just not quite there yet?
You know what I think is great is that people are going beyond Siri because they can. In the accessibility community, they have arguments about Cortana versus Siri versus Google Now. There are choices, and there are plenty of users of all of these platforms, and they get to make their choices based on whether the technology works for them, not, oh, this is the accessible one. I mean, obviously, there's accessibility implications for any voice-based command and control system, but there are ways in which one could create barriers to accessibility, and none of these technologies really do. But I have plenty of Android using friends and Windows using friends, and then Mac using friends, and we get to have the same arguments about which voice control system is better that anybody outside the accessibility community does. And obviously, there are specific implications and applications. I know a lot of people who are into some level of home automation, or at least in terms of managing their lives in a way that is highly correlated with the voice control apps. I'm personally still, I think a lot of people went through a disenchantment with Siri. I have pretty good luck with it, to be really honest. And I haven't dug into the other voice control apps to a great extent because I have not personally felt a need to do so other than just to learn about them. I feel like Siri kind of went through a trough and has come back a little bit. There are people that quite rightly point out that there are things that you can do with Hound. I haven't used Hound, but with Cortana and with the Amazon Echo that aren't really possible with Siri. And I hope Apple continues, and I know they will, to develop Siri and make it even more competitive. But I do feel like Siri is in a pretty good place. And I also want to include the dictation aspect of Siri so that a lot of people inside and outside of the accessibility community use dictation to get stuff into their iOS devices as well as to get stuff out of it via Siri.
Shelly, I plead with people to use the dictation feature. I know we're not quite socially there to where it looks cool to be talking to yourself with your phone, held up.
I have trouble with that one.
But we're getting there because it is becoming so useful. And I mean, I usually have a Bluetooth earpiece in when I'm driving, or and a lot of times even in public, and so I'm hearing things back that other people aren't hearing, which some people might say I do anyway. I don't know, but I think it is just an amazing thing that is being overlooked. I'm glad to hear that you have good luck with Siri. I have really good luck with Siri as well, and I wish more people would try it, because I think it would enhance their use of their devices and also encourage Apple and pressure Apple to keep pushing it forward.
I feel like the other developers out there, like I say, whether it's the Echo or whether it's Google, they can't help but be pressuring Apple to make that happen. And with CarPlay and with all the other integrations that Apple's trying to do, Siri has to be an important part of what they're doing. And I feel like it is continuing to grow. It's never as fast as people want it to be. Siri suffers from kind of being the first voice control system that a lot of people were exposed to. And so they sort of feel like it's long in the tooth. And as I say, I don't really feel that way. I think Siri had some tough times around iOS 8, but I feel like it's gotten better and more reliable. It's not at the moment super flashy, but I feel like when I ask it to do something, it usually does. I have good experience with calling out to it. I won't do it, but calling out across the room and asking it a question. Sometimes it works better than others, but I have a large echoey living room, so that may have something to do with it too. And again, I'm not a total apologist for it. I think the pressure from other great tools can only be better for Apple and better for Siri. So I just don't use the Google. I don't use Cortana, and I don't use mostly. Well, I'm not a Windows person, but I don't use Google stuff because it just isn't in my wheelhouse. I don't use a lot of. I just haven't gotten into it. And I think that's the thing with the Google stuff, is that you have to kind of commit to using it enough so that it can learn about you and do some of those neat tricks that everybody likes that it does. It's like, oh, look, it showed me a card that tells me that, I'm near this sushi place that I like and that I asked about last week or whatever. Well, if you don't use it every day, it's not going to get that much intelligence about you. And so that's where I'm at. And I use Siri, although I will say, just as an aside, and it doesn't have to do with Siri, but it has to do with Apple sort of learning about me. I'm a transit user. I use public transportation where I live here in Austin, Texas, and I was really annoyed when Apple Maps added transit information in iOS 9 and did not include a lot of cities, including my own. Yesterday, I got a notification center indication from Maps, and it says Apple Maps now has transit for Austin, Texas. And that was great on two levels. First of all, I get my transit information, and second, and more importantly, whether Maps knew specifically that I was a transit user or just gave me the information based on the fact that I live in Austin, Texas and do a lot of transit-oriented searches. It was great that Apple let me know that before I had to find out about it on Twitter.
Well, we all have that problem. I haven't really looked, but I'm not sure there's any transit information available for my city in Harrisburg. But somebody's got to be first, somebody's got to be last. So
sure.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that I found out about it, because when I was working on the transit related stuff in the book a couple of months ago, it didn't exist. And now that it does, Apple has let me know about it in a just-in-time kind of a way, so that when I plan a trip later today or tomorrow, I have that there. And so that was the part that impressed me as much as having the information itself.
When you say, and don't do it, when you say you call out to Siri, is that on your iOS devices, or are you using the TV, or how are you using Siri?
I do it on my iOS. I have my phone in an area of my living room. I have a sort of one great room in my house, and the phone sits on a charger on a table at the edge of that room. And so often that phone is sitting there most of the time. And so when I walk through and I want to know what temperature it is, I will often ask. I like to know the temperature. That's a weird thing with me. I ask about weather a lot.
Oh, that's okay. It's something we all have to deal with.
I have it set a timer for me when I'm cooking in the kitchen so that I don't have to touch the device. Timers and weather, my two favorite Siri things.
Okay, that's good. That's useful.
Yeah.
Somehow we always do this. We go running off into an area. Let's pull back to the book a little bit and talk about how it's structured and some of the other changes that you've made.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a chapter in the book for each broad category of accessibility. Well, let me back up further. So the first couple of chapters are introducing you to the Apple ecosystem if you are not an Apple person, because I don't want to assume that somebody just has an iOS device, knows as much or spends as much time in Apple world as you and I do. So there are a couple chapters that introduce the Apple ecosystem and the devices that we currently have access to. And then the second chapter sort of explains how accessibility in general works with that ecosystem and what kinds of accessibility tools you'll find and how they're discussed through the rest of the book. Then chapters 3 and 4 are about blindness and low vision, respectively. Chapter 5 is actually all about Siri, and that's the free chapter I make available on my site. So you get, in addition to looking at that free chapter and figuring out whether you like the book and like the way I write or not, you get a lot of free Siri commands out of it. So that's a free download. The next chapter is concerned with hearing impaired accessibility. So everything from custom ringtones and vibrations to hearing aid support. The next chapter is kind of a hybrid of accessibility for folks with cognitive disabilities. So in the autism spectrum, the guided access and how educators can use those tools to help students. And then that chapter also covers motor accessibility. So how to use a switch control, touch accommodation, and assistive touch. And then the last two chapters are apps. So I have an enormous chapter that covers all of the apps that are included with iOS. And it's astonishing how many apps Apple gives you, and they're more all the time. And so what I do is I don't give you a comprehensive tutorial on the app, but I tell you enough about the app so that you can use it in an accessible way. I point out what the accessibility features of the apps are, how you can use it accessibly or how you cannot if there are any barriers. And then I provide some alternatives for folks. So if you don't like the way mail works, here are some other accessible mail clients. And then the last chapter is about the 110 or so third-party apps that are organized in categories based on how awesome they are first and how accessible they are second. And then finally, I've got some appendices with some voiceover and some Braille display command keyboard shortcuts. So it's both a reference and a how-to guide. And I'm tired just explaining all that, honestly. It's just a long book, but
well, I like it because it's thorough, and it also sounds like you've made it pretty easy to go and find the information that you're particularly looking for, or you can just start from the beginning and work your way through, and then you're an expert at the end.
Sure, I don't expect everybody to read every page. They're welcome to do so, but the point is that it's organized in such a way that you can continue to have it available to you as a reference. And I feel like if you don't need the whole book, it's priced in such a way and it's organized in such a way that you won't feel as if you've gotten something that is not useful to you, even if you are only concerned with the voiceover chapter or only concerned with the low vision chapter. Because, like I say, as a person with low vision myself, I've done everything in that chapter I can possibly think of to help you figure out accessible ways to use your iPhone. And you may or may not use voiceover as well, but that's another chapter, and you can flip back and you can look at that. And then after that, you can look at my list of apps and you can go shopping at the App Store and be mad at me because a lot of those apps cost money, but we all do that. I'll buy a few more apps than we should.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what version or what edition of this is the book? I've lost track.
This is the third edition. It is. I do minor updates. So this is iOS 9.2, and it's the third major edition of the book. I've done tiny free updates for people who, for example, I think I did iOS 8.1, and then for 8.4, I think I had a minor free update. But this is the third major edition. I'll probably do OS 10 if they come out on schedule like that. If it's September as it usually is, my goal would be to have the OS 10 version or whatever the next major release of iOS is out as soon as Apple provides it to us, or as quickly thereafter as I can. But it usually takes a little while. I'm not somebody that tries to come out on day and date. I remember back in the days when I was writing print books. Remember print books? There were publishers that really wanted you to have the book out the first day that the new operating system or the new version of software shipped, and those were not very good books because we never had the chance to learn about things that we do if we take our time. And so that's always been my approach, is to take my time and make the book better.
This may be unfair. I'm not asking for speculation or anything like that. I guess I'm asking almost for your top 3, top 5, whatever wish list of accessibility improvements or changes for iOS 10.
Oh well, let me think about that. That's the thing is it's gotten so good that there are not enormous things. I mean, they would all be fairly small tweaks to be, well, okay, I guess one big one, this is an idea I've had for some time, and this is on low vision, so it's a little bit log rolling because it's what Shelly wants as opposed to the macro accessibility community. I would like the ability to have a set of low vision settings that one could save and then save to iCloud and then use them across their own devices. And that would give you the ability to share a device with others who don't need those accessibility features, or to take your particular set of accessibility features and send them to your iPad without having to sit and configure everything. And then related to that, I would like a few more tweaks as far as how much adjustment I can make to the visual interface. So the increased contrast settings right now are toggle switches. I would actually like some sliders that would give me some granularity about the contrast increase. So that's a couple of them. I know my friends who use Braille displays to connect to their iOS device. So a Braille display is a device that allows you to have the output from VoiceOver in Braille, so under your fingers, as it were. So that is a fabulous device that a lot of people who are both blind and deafblind people use that as well. And I know my friends who use those devices would like some stability improvements and just some speed improvements and the like. Some of that did happen in iOS 9, and I know there are a few bugs out there that they would like to have squashed. So those are a couple of things.
Those are pretty good ones. I love the idea of the group of settings. I think that could be applicable for a whole lot of people for a whole lot of reasons. But not just. I'd like to see something like that implemented for a lot of other things in iOS,
me too.
and for that matter in the Mac. But that's another show.
See, that would be great. That's a perfect example of something that is useful to everybody, having specific application to accessibility. And so I couch it in terms of accessibility. But yeah, if I could take all of my settings, or if, for example, I manage my mom's iPad, if I could set all her settings and then put it in iCloud Drive and then go over to her house and then download them to her iPad and reboot the iPad and have them all work, that would be fabulous.
Okay, Apple, I hope you're listening.
Yeah, get right on that, Apple, will you?
Shelly wants it, I want it, there you go. That's enough. Shelly, give us the specifics on the book, where they can get it, how much it costs, if there are upgrade options, how it all is working for you.
Sure. So my website is iosaccessbook.com. You can buy the book in EPUB format or in PDF format from that site. There's also a link to the iBook store where the EPUB version, is also available. It costs $20. If you purchase the book after the release of iOS 9, so September of 2015, you are entitled to a free upgrade. And all those people have actually gotten emails by now with their free upgrade links in there. So it probably doesn't apply to anybody who's listening. But basically what I do is, if between the time that the new version of the operating system comes out and the time that I get the next book out, anybody who buys in that window gets a free upgrade. So iosaccessbook.com, and you can also see the full table of contents as well as the free Siri chapter. I haven't actually gotten the iOS 9 version of that free chapter up yet. That'll probably be in a day or two. But the iOS 8 version is there, and you can sort of get a sense of how the book is arranged and structured from that.
Great. And, of course, that's the website for the book. How about personal websites, social media, all that?
So I'm Shelly on Twitter, Shelly. Find me there. The book also has a Twitter iOS access book. I do a podcast called Parallel Podcast, and it is at parallelpodcast.com. I talk to one mainstream and one accessibility person, and we talk about whatever we're going to talk about. Accessibility comes up, but it is not primarily. It's a tech podcast with accessibility sprinkles. And I'm also a panelist on the Maccessibility Roundtable every couple of weeks. That's at maccessibility.net. So that should be enough for anybody who wants to keep up with me.
And once in a while, you show up on the Mac Jury as well. So
I do,
and
that's always fun.
Yeah, we're always glad to have you.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to have you here. This is always interesting. It gives us a view into a world that a lot of us maybe don't pay as much attention to as we could or should. And when I say could or should, from not just our own benefit, but the benefit of loved ones around us that maybe we're involved with. So, folks, go check this out. Whether you think you need it, whether you think it applies to you or not, definitely go check it out and check out all of Shelly's stuff. Shelly, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Chuck. This was fun.
Hey, we'll do it again.
All right.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. We will do this again as well. We hope you'll join us. As always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the Mac Voices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.